What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Phoenix channel. Getting close to end of the year here. Hope everybody's well. If you like these videos, consider hitting that like button. Consider subscribing to my channel. And yeah, figured I'd do a little homie status today for you guys out here in downtown Arizona. And yeah, obviously not like an LA vibe. It's a little bit calmer here, but yeah, still, we'll do a G status. So wanted to come at you guys, give you the rundown of the latest and greatest on EOS, and kind of discuss my thoughts for next year, where we're going. It's going to be an exciting year, and a lot of things to look forward to. So without further ado, first topic we have on the list, this is on rehearse, no notes, no nothing. You know how we do it on here. Just a guy and his camera. One of the things we need to discuss is the resource exchange. So for those that don't know, REX stands for the resource exchange. You guys have probably heard a lot about this, a lot of issues with REX. And what it boils down to is essentially we have demand on the network, and we have some issues with the model as it stands today. We had, one application or one project, you can call it, called EOS. EOS is dead, oh shit. And there were some other things that, or it might have been Inumuvo or some project like that is dead, oh shit. And then it just launched on this application. So the gist of it is, for those that are wondering, is you put in 0.001, allegedly, okay? This is not investment advice. No one's telling you to do this stuff, but allegedly, some people have put in 0.001 of an EOS on the smart contract, and utilizing their CPU, they've been able to send hundreds, thousands of transactions, and every time they send one of those transactions to the smart contract, every time they interact with it, the smart contract returns a certain amount of EOS. Okay, so it's essentially a way to mine. It's a type of computational mining on this network, and so this caused a pretty high popularity on the network. A lot of I would say, especially like Eastern users on EOS, actually had they were really attracted to this project for some reason, for one reason or another, and it doesn't matter. But the bottom line is they were attracted to it, they bought into it, and they started, renting CPU on the network to the extent that they rented the full amount of CPU that was available on the network. So you were getting like, I think right now we have like 30% of resources are staked to the resource exchange. So whenever you get 83% of 30% that is available on the resource exchange, it actually results in the resource exchange locking up. So that was one of the things that was uncovered with the REX model and this EOS project, is that they were able to detect this. I wouldn't call it a vulnerability. It's more like a flaw or a false assumption. If we get a really popular DApp, two things happen. We had this cap that occurred at 83.3% of the possible available resources. And the other issue is the yield just wasn't aggressive enough on the higher utilization rate. So what do I mean by that? Well, normally you would expect that if there's high demand for a commodity, and let's just take it outside of EOS, let's say gasoline, and you had a jug of gasoline, and you were the only guy with a jug of that gasoline, you would expect that gasoline actually it would have a high demand, and so the cost as the gasoline or as the commodity goes down, the availability of it or the supply, you would expect that the cost actually then goes up. That didn't happen with the EOS REX exchange, unfortunately, and it might have to do with how it was coded or how it was implemented, but it really didn't do what I think most of us were expecting it to do, unfortunately. And so because of that, now there's a couple things happened. That was one of them. That is independent of this cap issue I just discussed, this 83.33%, meaning if the contract hits 83.33% of its available supply, it locks up. It no longer allows people to rent resources on the EOS network, which is kind of a problem if you ask me. So that was the first problem. The second problem is the yield just actually didn't increase the way it should have when you have high demand for resources. And so because of that, there was no incentive for people to actually lend their resources on the network. Kind of a problem, right, guys? So we had issues like that. And so really, if you think about it, this was a good learning lesson for I think for EOS and for the network. You know, if you think about it a bit and kind of where we're at with things, that's just not something that should happen. And obviously, if we're going to deploy, how you doing? And obviously, if you're going to deploy like a voice application on EOS, right? You're going to want the resources to work very optimally, okay? Because you're going to have thousands or millions of users on the network, and it just, you know, you can't have those kinds of things like what happened now, because it would seize the application from working in some cases. I don't think that's totally the case, because I know that Block 1 has a plan to deploy voice on multiple chains, but it's still kind of significant if you can't actually send transactions and you intend to use the mainnet in some way. So consider it a blessing, and in fact, one of the greatest gifts that EIDOS gave the EOS network is this recognition of issues with resources. So I think, again, the two main issues there was the artificial cap of 83.3% and this lack of a yield as the demand for these resources went up. And so there was no real incentive for people to actually stake into this contract, into this model, right? Because without any yield, why would you do it? And you're risking the high possibility of actually getting locked up, the RECs locked up, the resources locked up. So, like, those are kind of some major issues, right? So Dan Larimer, CTO of Block 1, has proposed a fix, two fixes actually. There was a short-term or shorter-term fix and a long-term fix. And he published actually a paper called, I think it's CPU or RECs Reimagined. I'm not actually sure what it's actually called. I don't have notes in front of me, but I know that one of the purposes of it is to actually look at taking all the resources on the network and putting them into this contract, as opposed to having more of a voluntary system where people stake their resources to a network and then allow people to rent them. This is going to force, or it's going to transfer, it's going to transition the network from a resource ownership model to a rental model. And so that does a couple things for us. One, it actually unlocks by default all the resources on the network for dApps and users to rent from. And that may not seem like a big deal, but it actually kind of is a big deal if you think about it, because right now we only have about 30% of the available resources available on the network. And that's because only 30% of the available tokens were actually lent into the RECs, the resource exchange. Now with this new model, it essentially by default will have all of the resources in the system contract available for rent by all users. And so one could argue that technically it's not likely that we're going to have all the users want to rent CPU if it actually costs them, if it's an opportunity cost. And what do I mean by an opportunity cost? Well, the new model for you staking your EOS, not using the CPU, right? Not renting CPU, you are going to get rental fees, right? Rental fees from this system contract. And it depends on how much of the resource is used on the network, what the utilization rate is, and what the BP set as the return for all the users. But you're going to get some amount there. And if you decide over time to save that amount or not use and not rent resources, you're actually going to have a kind of a DeFi income if you think about it. Now I don't want to call it that, so it's allegedly just a return of resources, right? A return of some additional resources over time. But that's what it is. And so that could be a really effective way at giving people enough incentive to strongly consider their desire to play in games or things like EOS. Because with this new model that Dan has proposed, it will take someone to intentionally rent resources, that is, spend money to send transactions on the network. And that's an opportunity cost versus maybe just pocketing that money, right? That's a pretty significant opportunity cost. So is it going to be enough to mitigate some of the issues? That's a fair question, and we'll have to see how it evolves over time. The other question is, and I know this was one of the concerns that Rob Finch and some others mentioned, is, and shout out to Rob, man, for coming back on the Everything EOS channel today. It was nice to see him on there, so shout out to you, Rob. And shout out to all the homies, the gang. We got the Crypto Type, EOS Apologist, Crypto Fees, Rezi, and everybody else, man, who's tuning in. Thanks for all you do. And Eddie, I see you, and a few others as well. So, but what is going to happen is that income, it does present an opportunity cost, and it does indeed put a developer who's trying to build an application on this network, it gives them a better shot at doing that by having 100% of the resources available, the whole time. That's a good way of possibly accomplishing that. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll have to see how it evolves, but I actually think that it's better from a strategic standpoint for the applications that will be deployed on EOS. So that's where we're at right now. I think it still has time still needs time for testing, and I don't know. We might be looking at several more weeks, maybe. Obviously there's a plan to have voice beta Valentine's Day of 2020, but I don't think they'll be shooting to have voice beta on the mainnet. So I think there's still some time to get this tested, get this refined. Again, one of the concerns that Rob had mentioned, I kind of lost my train of thought back there, was whether or not the return that you get from this new model would actually pay for, if it would actually pay for the resources that you get now. Would it be a one-for-one? And I think when I did the rough math, it didn't look like it was a one-for-one. I mean, it looked like it might have been, it looks like it might be a one-to-one at higher utilization rates, but it actually did not appear like it was a one-to-one at lower utilization rates. Meaning, if you have 100% of the network available for rent, and you're only renting actually 10% of the network, I don't think at 10% it actually matches. Like, you won't actually be able to pay for the resources you would have gotten with the current model, right? So I think Dan's model matches the existing model, but I think it only does that at higher rates. But I'd like to see if someone else has can prove me wrong and show the math. I'd like to know about that. That'd be of some interest, and definitely of some use and some interest, and something to learn. And maybe I could stand corrected. So anyway, that's kind of where that is. Other exciting news: Dan Larimer mentions that he's going to actually be heading over to, Congress or a building, a congressional building, to do a talk on the future of money, the future of government, and the future of law. And I guess there's going to be like the World Bank and some other folks there. So that'll be at the end of December 2020. So we'll have to see what comes out of that. It's going to be some interesting times. I just take those kind of things with a grain of salt, but I think Dan and Block 1 are headed in the right direction. I had a conversation with somebody else about this actually pretty recently, and one of the things I mentioned is there's such a huge void. There's such a huge void about the education, right, that government has about this technology. And so until they actually understand this stuff a little bit better, I think we're going to have some significant challenges with regulations and policies that will allow entrepreneurs to actually innovate in the space. It just hasn't happened right now, right? And so there's such a huge gap about not only what Bitcoin is, but what blockchain, what smart contracts are. Why would a country want to have rules and policies that enable this and unlock it? Because you're in a global competition with other countries, and the other countries are not really waiting around. China is not waiting around. China is actively deploying whole programs in universities and government centers, and because of the government, the government arrangement they have, is a lot less barriers to actually making things happen there than there is in the United States. So the United States really needs to, I think, wake up a little bit and see that people are trying to, innovate here and help the U.S. remain competitive. But it actually takes, I think, both sides, right? Both parties. It takes the innovators and it takes government that want to come together. And so if there's one thing I could say that I think B1, I've seen some moves, some good moves by them. I've seen some recent positions on the Block 1 website. Looks like they're heading up some initiatives in the education space across universities, which is a good move. I think we need to see more of that. Ideally, what would even be cooler is if we had a coalition of different blockchains and organizations to lead some of that effort, because it's a huge thing to tackle, just the general education, getting more blockchain engineers established, not just at Virginia Tech, but around the whole country, because there's a huge need for this if we're really going to scale this up. And there's a huge need in educating the governments as well about how this technology can be leveraged to deal with things such as consensus, deal with things such as negotiations for contracts, project management, risk assessment, right, and identity and reputation. Those are huge things, and there's just so much inefficiencies with government these days. So really hoping that B1 maybe looks to assign a position like that, maybe a dedicated contact that just works with government on the education space. I know they've done some things with lobbyists, but I think there's still a huge gap here, and still a huge gap in regulations, and again, maybe there needs to be a coalition move or strategy here. So I don't know what's going to take, guys, but that's what I'm saying. I'm sticking to it. So yeah, those are the things I'm keeping my radar on. How about you guys? What are you guys excited about in 2020? So much to talk about. Obviously, we got Voice, like I said, coming out. We got the EOS 3.0. There's been a lot of discussions on that. 2.0, 3.0. So a lot of tweets. Probably cover that in another video. So I think I'm going to leave it there, guys. We're at 19 minutes. If you guys like this video, consider hitting the like button. Consider subscribing to this channel. And until next time, guys, this is Phoenix signing off. Peace.